And welcome back to Closing Bell. We're talking issues of transformation in South Africa. A recent report has shown that black people are still largely excluded from the property sector value chain. Meanwhile, Business Unity South Africa has launched a comprehensive approach to black economic transformation for inclusive growth. The South African Institute for Black Property Practitioners CEO, Vuyiswa Mutshekwane, is with us now, and BUSA CEO, Tanya Cohen. Let's start with you, Tanya. Business Unity South Africa, you say you've launched a comprehensive approach. There's quite a lot of language in here which sounds familiar to the old language, so what's different?
I think what's different is that business has been having a conversation with itself. And we've been seriously looking at the state of transformation, the state of the economy, and across all the sectors saying, what do we need to do to actually stimulate the economy and grow the economy, and how do we de-racialize the South African economy? So we've been engaged in a process over the last 6 months. We've gone through our entire membership base. We've engaged with our boards, and we've engaged quite extensively with our policy committees and arrived at a business approach to economic transformation.
What would be the headline? What would you do that's going to make a difference?
I think the headline is that it is comprehensive and it is collaborative, and it is business acting in concert with each other and in collaboration with government and important social actors such as organised labour. We're very conscious that we need to get into the driving seat, that we need to do something different as business, but we can't do that on our own. Yeah.
Vuyiswa, the property sector, ironically, I suppose, in terms of transformation generally, is perhaps the worst performing sector. If you look at the mining charter and the pressure that the mining companies are under and how much they have transformed, the property sector is hardly transformed at all. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they are the obvious structural barriers, and not dissimilar from the mining sector, but the structural barriers are obviously access to finance, and how the financial services sector, the role that the financial services sector has to play in unlocking the value in the property sector. So I think there definitely hasn't been enough collaboration and partnership and commitment from the financial services sector to see that transformation happening. But I think also what needs to definitely be happening better is collaboration between all the role players. So government, ourselves as organizations that are advocating for transformation, as well as the financial services sector.
So collaboration is a word you both used. Tanya, how would you apply what you're going to do now to property, where transformation seems to be an intractable problem?
So we've identified 4 elements of our approach. The one is around inculcating a transformative culture within business. And I think that that's very, very appropriate in the property sector as it is in any other sector. And then there are 3 other elements. The one is around education and skills development, around job creation, particularly youth job creation, and how do we bring more people into the economy, regardless of the sector. And then the third is around stimulating enterprises in whatever sectors we engaged in, be it property or other sectors, because we're not going to grow the economy comprehensively on the basis of the current very concentrated businesses that are in the economy.
I'm looking for what you would do if you could wave the wand and make things happen. You say financial services companies are an issue when it comes to property. What's the blockage?
Yeah, look, I think there are a number of different approaches, and because there's a residential property sector that needs to be unlocked by ensuring that people have access to title deeds, and that can either be done through government or that can be done through creating some sort of a fund to allow people to have access to first-time ownership and therefore be able to get title deeds which they can then leverage and use for lending and access the financial services sector.
But isn't that a question of a political decision? I mean, the Free Market Foundation has pointed out how much wealth could be unlocked if land that people were living on was made available for them to own. I mean, this is not a difficult thing to do, but there's resistance to it, Tanya. Why?
I think we have to look at our regulatory structure much more generally and see to what extent it is providing an unintended barrier to access for businesses generally. And it isn't confined to one sector. I think they're very well-intended laws that we have in place, but they are acting as constraints to doing business. They're acting as constraints to formality of businesses, and they're acting as constraints to enterprise development. So we have to work together with government to unlock that. And we're starting to see that there are the elements of that type of cooperation in a number of different places. So I know everyone's spoken about green shoots, but we're certainly seeing the green shoots of that collaboration when we start to work together on issues such as the minimum wage and labour relations stability. And we start to find each other across business and government and organised labour.
Well, there's a problem at the moment of trust between business and government. Both sides admit this. We know why it's happened in the last year or so. How do we fix that?
Look, I think the term policy certainty really sits at the heart of this discussion. And that's really what trust is, isn't it? So I think we need to get to a point, and we understand what the political climate is like at this point in time, but ultimately we are not going to, and whichever side of the fence you're sitting on, there needs to be a lot more clearer communication from a policy perspective, and that will then enable us to plan, unlock and figure out what the way forward is.
What's your sense of that?
Absolutely agree. That's spot on, is that we need to create a climate that is stable, that is predictable. Policy certainty has an absolutely key part to play. And I think from a business perspective, we're certainly committed to playing our part.
Well, the mining charter has caused enormous unhappiness with the mining industry, so there's no trust and there's no certainty there. Which sectors are doing better than other sectors when it comes to trust, certainty, and quietly getting on with it on the ground? Are you aware of one that's setting an example?
Well, I think the mining sector is an example of how we shouldn't do things at the current point in time, because it shows the danger of the lack of a collaborative approach. Where we see some good examples is in the banking sector, where you have, and I think that generally the good examples are actually coming out of processes where there's a charter council, there's a process where the industry gets together and they start driving solutions that are industry specific.
If I may just add, the unfortunate thing, though, is that everybody getting along and agreeing on a charter doesn't guarantee progress. I would argue that the property sector actually is one of those sectors where everybody gets along, and we've managed to agree on a charter, we've managed to agree on targets, and yet still those targets are unmet, and still the progress is non-existent. So I think the question is not so much how do we get everyone to trust each other and get along. The question is, how do we get action and results, and how do we really start to put this inclusive growth target into play?
Tanya, final question. You talked about collaboration, business taking the initiative, not being told to do it by government, but coming up with solutions. Now, last year we had the CEO initiative, and there's a sense of traction getting going. Is that traction getting established again?
It is. There was a slight stalling of the process towards the beginning of the year, but that is certainly back on track. There have been recent meetings between government and business in terms of the YES initiative and trying to get that back on track in terms of 1 million jobs for youth over the next 3 years. And we certainly have the commitment from business to really focus on what are those scalable, innovative solutions that we can drive to address the challenges that we're facing.
That was the South African Institute for Black Property Practitioners CEO Vuyiswa Mutshekwane and the BUSA CEO Tanya Cohen. Now, the rand may have taken a couple of hard knocks in recent months, and the world may feel like an uncertain place at the moment. That hasn't affected South Africans' lust for travel. That's one of the many findings in the Cheap Flights Compass Report South Africa. Joining us now to talk about these and other trends in the report is Richard Wilkes, Global Head of Sales, Digital Travel Deals at Cheap Flights. Richard, you had access over a year to an enormous amount of data. What's it telling us?
Yes, indeed, we have almost equated to about 68 years' worth of flight searches, nearly 600,000 hours of searching in the last year. And it's actually been extremely encouraging, David, that South Africans have not lost their wanderlust for travel at all. It may be geographically that you're quite far away from a lot of key popular destinations, but the usual ones remain. Europe is a very, very sought-after destination to fly out to, in particular the UK, with almost 29% of searches from South Africa being to UK, London being the most